My name is Lee Middleton. I'm Chief Executive of the National Youth Agency, and it's my pleasure to chair this session with friends who either travelled around the country or we've done various events in the past. Teresa in particular and I have sat on many panels at many events, usually in the Houses of Parliament of some description. Yeah. But so yes, I'm really pleased to be joined. Well, hopefully Mims will join us. Thank you to Councillor Teresa Heritage, who's the Vice Chair of Children and Young People's Board of the LGA. Samuel Kasumu, Councillor for Welling Hatfield Council. Have I got that right? And previously worked with Number 10. David Britton from YMCA England and Wales, and Siana, who's one of the YMCA's ambassadors. So fantastic to have you all here. Today we're talking about, how can Conservative councils build back better for young people? There's an interesting question for me, and what does build back better mean? A bit like what does levelling up mean? And maybe we can unpick that conversation. I'm going to ask each of our panellists to make an input of 3 to 5 minutes, up to them. It doesn't have to be that long. And then we'll throw it open to questions, and we'll have a bit of a debate and a discussion. You're very welcome to come along the front, and we'll just have a sort of round table almost, rather than talking from across the room. But thank you for joining us. I mean, Youth Zone and all these charities on the screen here come together to champion the needs and wants of young people and to make a difference. We come to conference to make sure that the voices of young people are heard by politicians, by their advisors, by their teams, by local councillors. It's not just about MPs and ministers. There's an awful lot of councillors here that work across local government, regional government, metro mayors, etc., offices. And so these are really important conversations as we come out of the pandemic. And the big statistic that the NYA throws around at the moment is, we work with, actually I've got Anne Longfield over here, we worked with her when Anne was the Children's Commissioner to look at what are the vulnerabilities of young people as a result of the pandemic. And pre-pandemic, about 1 million young people would access youth services or needed to access youth services per year. That number by the end of the second lockdown had tripled to 3 million young people. The impact of losing your family connect, your social networks, your educational networks, profound difference to young people. The digital poverty that some young people felt meant that the numbers of young people who needed support was never greater. So as we learn from that process, as we come out of the pandemic, and I'm not convinced it's quite over yet. I'm a bit nervous, a bit twitchy. It's not got cold yet, and we haven't seen what winter throws at us. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be good. So I'm interested in our panellists' thoughts on how we build back better for young people and how the role of councils in doing that. I'm going to start. I was going to start with Mims, but she's not here because Mims, when joins us, has had half an hour and has got to go. So if she turns up, we'll whoever's speaking can finish, and then we'll go over to Mims. But Teresa, could I ask you to kick us off? Is that okay? You just need to pick the hand mic up. Thank you.
Good evening. Works. As I said, I'm Councillor Teresa Heritage. I'm the Executive Member for Children's Services, or Children, Young People and Families Services at Hertfordshire County Council. And I'm also the Conservative Lead Member for Children and Young People at the LGA, and I'm Vice Chairman of the board there. So I've been doing that for a few years now. And thank you to the YMCA and the NYA for hosting tonight's discussion. They're always good, and we always listen to the voice of the young people. So not too many young people here yet. I don't know if there's more coming, but anyway. I'd like to begin by highlighting the power and importance of youth services in building back better. They give young people safe spaces to go to and form trusted relationships with adults that can be the difference between being supported to make positive choices and being drawn into negative situations. Local authorities such as my own have a key role in either direct delivery of commissioning or working in partnership, and more we're working in partnership with the voluntary sector. So this includes establishing what services and support are needed and wanted, how all local provision supports young people, identifying the outcomes that matter most to young people. For example, new ways of working around the country, engaging young people, is being explored in Lancashire, thanks to a government-funded project. Non-alcohol specialist staff are getting extra training, and early intervention work is taking place with teenagers and families. despite the hard work of councils, we are concerned at the LGA about the government's focus and vision for youth services, as we feel this has waned slightly. Due to funding reductions, increased need for urgent child protection work, council spending on youth services has been cut by 69% since 2010, from 1.4 billion to 429 million in 2018. It is therefore essential that the 500 million announced as the Youth Investment Fund in 2019 is released as soon as possible. And can I say around the Youth Investment Fund, when civil servants, I'll say, came to the LGA to talk about this, they spoke about buildings. Now, to my mind, it's not about buildings. It's about providing services for young people. There are plenty of buildings we can use. We don't have to build anything else. We just need the support staff and the funding behind to deliver services. So young people, as we know, have been severely impacted by the pandemic, and mental health issues, particularly amongst the more disadvantaged children, has increased. That's increased quite considerably. I'm not sure why, and I don't know if that's because there's not enough support in the home, but there has been an increase. I cynically also think it's because everybody talks about mental health. And so a child could say, I've got poor mental health, I really can't cope. It's a bit cynical, I know, but sometimes I think the rhetoric that's out there doesn't help. But while we need to understand why the government's focus is on academic recovery, a broader approach is needed that includes measures to support children and young people's socialisation, communication, and, as I said, mental health and well-being. While there is more the government can do, Conservative councils can also play a role in ensuring young people feel best supported. Another example I have is the youth intervention projects funded by the Early Youth Intervention in Nottinghamshire, which targeted young people most at risk during the pandemic. The project provided bespoke one-to-one youth support, working with local agencies to coordinate a strategic response to support young people without significant adults in their lives. So the team delivered an increase in young people's aspirations. And as I said at earlier sessions today, the support needed for young people will vary around the country depending on the circumstance and what the local authorities are already doing. So in Gloucestershire, they've committed to work with young people around a youth climate panel, because we know that young people are concerned. And they have a panel of 16 to 25-year-olds, and they're involved in key future planning. But at the LGA, we realised quite early on that, as this is all Zoom meetings, of course, as we came out of pandemic, we delivered a child-centred recovery strategy to Whitehall, showing the LGA's ambitions for young people at the heart of government, because we really feel it's important to build recovery around young people. And actually, even though that's not necessarily going to come out as a strategy from government, we do know that they are beginning to focus on young people whilst they talk about skills and jobs. Another vision that we had coming out of that recovery strategy was that departments would join up together and work together rather than have a disparate funding coming out to all various places, but obviously focusing most on disadvantaged children and disabled children who have had the most challenging times during the pandemic. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Teresa. You're going to go last. I want to give you the young person the last word, so I'll come to you at the end. Samuel, would you like to give us your thoughts?
Yes, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Lee and the team, for having me again. As was mentioned in Samuel Kasuma, up until the end of May, I was Senior Special Advisor to the Prime Minister and responsible for civil society and communities, and part of my portfolio included youth and some violent crime reduction work as well. So really pleased to be part of this conversation. I'm also a local councillor at the moment, so I suppose I'll be sharing reflections on both. I'm going to try and be very quick so we can get into a discussion. So on building community cohesion by giving young people a voice and a role in their local community, I'm going to speak about I work in Welland Hatfield, where I'm a counsellor. I often have to remind our officers that age is a protected characteristic under the Equality Act. Young people are often forgotten during the consultation stage for major activities. For example, I chair the Cabinet Planning and Parking Panel. So that's a committee responsible for developing our local plan. So how many houses are we going to build over the next dozen years, and where they're going to go, and what kind of homes are we going to have, and schools and hospitals, etc. And what I often find is the folks who we engage the most are a particular type of individual. Usually a homeowner, usually of a particular age profile, usually not keen for any homes to be built anywhere near their own home or their backyard. But how many of them actually consider the fact that young people will struggle to get onto the housing ladder with less access to affordable starter homes? It's often something that I have to bring up, or nobody else it seems to care. At Welland Hatfield, we conducted a provision gap analysis survey of over 2,200 young people. The YMCA are the ones that helped us to deliver this work. The report highlighted the correlation between antisocial behaviour and when young people feel like there is a lack of provision. We were also able to identify the specific areas where there were gaps and responded accordingly. We also have the Services for Young People, Welland Hatfield Young People's Forum, an inclusive space for young people to discuss and debate topics that are affecting them. So the Welland Hatfield Youth Council has also been working with Just Talk Hearts to produce an interactive mental health pack focused on the 5 ways to well-being. On the Just Talk website, you can walk through the e-learning modules to learn about the 5 ways. So we work together to deliver key priorities on safety, health, achieving employment, and well-being with service providers, including the YMCA and many others. Now, on providing experiences and opportunity with long-term funding for young people, I have to agree with the councillor that actually we made significant promises. I was part of the team that wrote the manifesto in 2019. So I know that we committed to investing at least £500 million via the Youth Investment Fund. There was a guy that got John Barnes to come and help us to announce it with the Prime Minister, which was very peculiar because John Barnes is not a Tory, but it was an interesting experience. But the reality is, as was mentioned earlier, youth services have been decimated over the last decade. We all know this. And we know that there was an argument that when we wrote the manifesto, we were not aware of the upcoming pandemic. But my view is very clear that actually now more than ever is the time to invest in our young people who've of course been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. But I do think we have to be creative about that. So my policy hat on, I think, well, where are we going to find 500 million quid? And I would point people towards examples around the work we've done around dormant assets and Sean Bailey's manifesto for London, where he identified over £400 million that could be invested in young people. So it's definitely doable, but we just need the political will. I suppose I'll pause there, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Right, final, David from YMCA. It's been brilliant to partner with you on doing this event, so thank you to YMCA and the team there. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so can everyone hear me okay? Yeah? Fantastic. So for those of you who don't know, YMCA reaches 600,000 young people every single year. We operate in 700 communities across the country, and that's everything from early years provision through to our youth services and on to our supported housing. So we've been doing some research work, and we've been going across the country, and particularly in red wall seats as well, to find out what's going on, how we can level up, and what detail we can put behind the slogan, basically. So we brought together MPs, councillors, young people, local organisations, schools, head teachers, all from local areas to tell us what the key issues are. So I'm going to share with you some interim findings. We're still going through the process at the moment, so this is off the back of 8 of the roundtables we've run so far. And there's 4 main themes that are coming out of that work. First of all, youth services. No one's going to be surprised by that. The biggest thing we keep hearing is about reliability and the sustainability of youth services funding. Young people don't want something that's going to last 6 weeks. They want something that's reliably there throughout the whole time that they're young. We've seen the absolute decimation, as we've heard today, of youth services across the country, so we need to make sure that we emphasise the funding that's needed in those spaces. It's not necessarily about buildings, it's about making sure that those services are there in local communities. The demand has massively increased and the pot has significantly shrunk. That maths just doesn't work, so we need to make sure we address that. And location is key. People want something that's walking distance, something that's the end of their road, something that's in their communities, not to have to travel in and get a bus to the centre of their towns. And universality is key as well. So making sure that all young people can access services, regardless of background, where they are. The second theme that comes out, and again, it's not going to be a shocker to anyone, is mental health services. And what people tell us isn't necessarily just about accessing them, it's about the threshold to access the services they need. So making sure that actually you don't have to reach that absolute crisis point, or have to go. We've heard across the country people having to actually make attempts on their own life to be able to access these services. We need to intervene much earlier than that. So that upstream intervention is so key, and we need to make sure that that's in place for people. Youth workers also tell us a lot around the baseline level of resilience in our young people. So we need to instill those key things in them, so actually we can make sure that they're not reaching that crisis point. So that, again, comes back to the youth work point raised earlier. The third is around a safe and secure roof over their head. Housing is the first step to make sure that young people feel safe and warm, and actually they've got the security where they are. There's a huge lack around affordable homes. There's new developments that are happening up and down the country, but are they prioritising young people and the needs of young people? Do these houses actually fit the spec of what they need? And family breakdown is something that we see is the biggest issue that puts someone into a YMCA. But actually, it's the biggest issue that gets them out of YMCA as well. So what are we doing around the mediation that's needed to support families locally? And it's the barriers to moving on. In our supported accommodation, we support thousands of young people up and down the country. And when they feel ready and they've rebuilt their lives and rebuilt their independence, there's huge barriers to be able to actually move on. So whether that's deposits needed for a rental, whether that's the benefit system working against them and disincentivising work, we need to make sure that is actually addressed and how we're going to move that going forward. And the fourth area, and the saddest area, quite frankly, is around aspiration. There is such a lack of aspiration in some of the areas we spoke to. When we went to areas like Barnsley or Stoke-on-Trent, we hear time and time again, these young people lack the role models in their community, lack the opportunities where they live, and that really is hitting into that levelling up agenda. So we need to make sure people feel like they've got a community around them that's going to support them, where they feel like they can thrive. So we're seeing that a lot in rural communities as well as urban. And it's all around the kind of the connections and career advice that people receive, right through to actually being able to see stuff happening on their doorstep. So they're the kind of top 4 things that we keep seeing in the roundtables that we're doing, and what the government needs to address when it's thinking about the levelling up agenda. Thank you.
Hey, brilliant. Thank you very much. So, young person.
Thank you.
Asania, give us your thoughts on this.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shana, and it's okay. I'm used to it. I'm representing the YMCA today as a young person. I'm not here to tell you stats and facts. I'm not here to tell you about young people in general. I'm kind of here to tell you my story and my opinion on it all. So, very simply, at 11 years old, I lost my dad. And unfortunately, it wasn't until I turned 16 and joined a universal youth programme that I actually got the help that I needed. And that was a youth worker. His name was Tom, and he was that role model. He actually had been through the same as me, lost a parent, and kind of resonated with me. I understood what I was feeling was actually allowed, what I was feeling was accepted, and grief and what it was. And really... after I joined that universal youth programme, it made me realise that I want to be that person for other people. So I got an apprenticeship, very luckily, and I got it in youth work, and now I do actually work for my local YMCA Worcestershire, as a youth worker. But I didn't get that support when I was 11 years old. It took 5 years for me to have a role model that wasn't my mum, that wasn't my brother, who were also grieving. It took 5 years for someone in my local community to say, that young person needs help and we need to give it them. I I didn't fall under the criteria of a young person that needed CAMS or mental health support. I was just a young person that was lost. I just needed someone to say and validate me and tell me my feelings were right. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that youth workers are role models. They are someone that isn't the authority. They aren't the police officers that walk around your local area. They aren't your family. They aren't your teachers. They're someone else that you can go to just to talk to. They're someone that can validate what you're feeling. And it's more just around that universal youth provision. I think we are really, really lacking, unfortunately, and I think that something needs to be done for that. So like I say, I wanted to be that for someone else. And since being a youth worker, the more young people I work with, the more I notice that early intervention is needed. As I said, not every young person falls under the criteria of needing a specific youth programme or youth provision. Some young people just want to go on a Thursday night to their local youth community centre and just see other people. I think especially after the last 18 months we've had, young people just want to speak to other young people. They aren't bothered about the counselling side of things at the moment. They just want to be out and about, doing things, learning things, enjoying themselves. And I also think that from having that help when I turned 16 after losing a parent, I think a lot of young people in COVID have lost people they love. And that has really hit home for me and made me realise that there actually still isn't enough out there for these kind of young people. So I think really, like I say, a lot of young people don't meet the criteria for significant levels of access to safe spaces, but they need them. Every young person needs somewhere to go just to vent, to release, to just enjoy themselves. And I do think that it should be open to everyone. I know, Teresa, you mentioned that any young person should be able to access youth services, but at the moment they are so targeted and they just aren't universal. I can't read my own handwriting, that's really good. But yeah, I think that by ensuring that all young people can access youth services, this then does go on to develop competent adults. I would like to say that because of that youth worker when I was 16, I've gone on to do what I do to help other people like he did me. And I think that having someone to look up to and just having an older person there that doesn't necessarily need to tell you where you're going in life or what job you need to do, just someone to listen and say, actually, yeah, your feelings are validated, it just really gives you that guidance that you need to move forward. And I think that's pretty much, that's all from me. But yeah, I do think universal youth services is where we need to go to move forward, definitely.
Yeah. Thank you very much. The NYA and YMCA worked together on a joint report in the last few weeks around the impact of finances on the youth sector and things. So just a few things I thought I'd pull out from that, really, which was, 41% of young people say they're worried about getting a job after school. Kickstart's there, and it's just been extended, isn't it? Which is good news today. But I mean, there are other challenges around getting into work. And if you've got a job, then you can get a house, a home. And if you've got a home, things go for you, and we know that link. 11.6% of young people, 16 to 24, are currently NEET, not in education, employment, training. 21% of young people convicted of a knife crime in England and Wales were aged between 10 and 17. Which is a pretty shocking kind of high-level statistic. 1 in 5 young people identified as having a mental health disorder in England. 1 in 5. There's how many people in the room? A number of us would be in that category. Young people say, their personal, youth services provide a sense of belonging, a safe place and space, and an opportunity for them to enjoy being young. And I think we're too quick to try and grow up sometimes, and actually life is about having fun. Life is about going out and exploring, taking a bit of risk, but in a controlled environment that youth workers, an organisation like the YMCA, allow young people to do, and I think that's absolutely crucial. And that trusted relationship with a trusted adult is incredibly precious, and that's the difference between maybe school or a police officer or a social worker, where a young person has no choice but to engage because you have to go to school. police officer stops you, you've got to talk to them. You vote with your feet when it's going into youth clubs or youth provision or youth projects. You know, it's voluntary. You can choose not to go. And my 20-odd years' experience of running youth services, we've never got a problem in getting young people to vote to come to our provision if you're providing the right thing in the right way. And I think that's profound. A really interesting statistic and a local government figure here, which was there's quite a postcode lottery around the country around the spend on youth services. The highest local authority spend is £250 per head. The lowest is £25 per head. You know, 10%. If you're in that 10% space, you're getting virtually nothing. You're getting very, very little, and some real challenges to doing that. And you know, services have been cut 73% since 2010. That's over £1 billion in current funding. You know, and yes, there's I call it the Mythical Youth Investment Fund because it's sort of announced 2 years ago at this conference, and we've yet to see it. We've yet to even know how it will be spent. And I know it's coming, and we've been talking to ministers while we've been here about it. But you know, that money was needed at the beginning of the pandemic to make a big difference, and it's just not flowed quick enough, unfortunately. As a result of that and other factors and COVID, the youth sector is going to be 25% smaller coming out of the pandemic than when we went into it. And there's an opportunity there to build back and create new projects, new opportunities, but there's some real factors there. So I think that's it from us as the panel. I want to throw it over to our wonderful audience. Thank you for coming late in the evening, sticking with us, whoever's still awake. And are there any questions for the panel? Anything you'd like to ask us?
Hello.
Hi.
I'm Abigail and I'm actually from Stoke-on-Trent. I completely understand the lack of aspiration that there is there. I was told from a young age to try and get out as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, that's exactly what I've done. So I now live in London. But as you mentioned, the youth services have been cut. I've seen crime in young people in my area. I'm very uncertain about the funding which is due to come and is still yet to come. So how can we encourage change and inspire young people without being so reliant on services which require such funding?
Okay, how can we inspire change in services without maybe the funding? Any thoughts? Any other questions? We can take some others and then we can come back to the panel. Oh, he's got a roving mic. Someone ask him a question. I mean, he's looking a bit, you know.
I was going to be cheeky and just lob a question in. This is specific about what can councils do and what can Conservative councils do. So what we can do without having to wait on government from waiting on high. What can we do without waiting on the Youth Investment Fund? I know that the spending is extremely tight. I know that youth services aren't statutory. But actually there's other things to do about empowering young people. It's not all about the youth service either. So I'm a big champion of youth services. But what can councils get on and do that puts young people around the table to hear their voices, to hear their ideas, to hear their enterprise that doesn't rely on simply them having to lobby for money for youth services? Because to be honest, in the short term, councils are really strapped for cash and the government isn't going to fill that gap. And let's be honest, in the very short term at least, there's a big lobbying campaign to be done, which NWA and YMC did magnificently as well as others. So what can you do now with young people, not for young people?
Fantastic. Teresa, would you like to take that one? I'll take that one. And then maybe Samuel if you want.
Right, so I'm talking now with my county councillor hat on, not LGA, okay? Because I'll talk local, which is what it's all about. It's about local. So in Hertfordshire, we've got some good accountants, and we actually managed to come out of COVID in the black. So we've actually put aside a COVID recovery fund of 9.7 million, and 2.3 million of that's going to be spent on building life chances, and that's mostly around children, young people and families. Specifically in relation to youths, if I can say that, because of the way Hertfordshire operates, and the county council does targeted services, so it's targeted on those children, young people with most difficult problems. We use the districts, or work with the districts to deliver district youth groups. So each district has its own youth group. And out of that Building Life Chances Fund, I think off the top of my head, there's £10,000 going into each district to build up what a district might need to do. So again, in Sammy's area, when Welling Garden City, Welling and Hatfield. They work with YMCA there in their youth group. So there's a lot of work going on there, so I know that that money will be well spent. In some other areas, the partners that work with the county council and the district council aren't necessarily as good, but we'll have to make sure that that money is spent wisely. So that's an immediate response. There's also funding going into life skills, around the skills agenda, helping families. So that's what we can do, but that's only because we've got some money, all right? So for those councils that haven't got the money, I'm not quite sure what they can do, but what immediately came to mind when you asked your question was there's probably some more that can be done to work with schools and colleges. I'm pretty sure on that. And our youth in Hertfordshire, the youth services does work on careers and skills and advice with the colleges and the schools. So I think that's a way forward. And also in Hertfordshire, because of the funding problems and just at the start of COVID, we actually established something we called SASH, Safeguarding Adolescents sort of a hub. So we've got dedicated youth workers who are available 24/7, who are working with young people who have problems with their families. So we trying to keep them in their homes, and that's working really well. So we put funding into that, but we had to make it a statutory service so we could make sure that under safeguarding we got funding out of the council, otherwise it might not have happened. So that early intervention funding is the issue. So if we could get the government to make early intervention funding statutory, i.e. like troubled families, but more of it, we'll have something we can build on, and then we can potentially stop the problems happening, and that 11-year-old who doesn't know what to do will have somewhere to go, whether it's a family centre or the new family hubs that we're all trying to develop. There'd be something there. So, okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. Samuel.
Thank you. In terms of what we can do in this current moment that we find ourselves in, I think a few things. One of the biggest challenges I had in number 10 is, very passionate about young people, improving outcomes, very passionate about spending government money on young people and investing in young people. But the sector, not just the youth sector, but charities as a whole, weren't always able to talk the language of the Treasury. And so number 10 in the middle, you had DCMS, you had Treasury, and more often than not, the Treasury would say, well, we need more information, we need more data, and we'd go back and say, where is the data? And then what we'd get back wouldn't help us to make that case. So there's definitely a big challenge around better data, and I know NYA are working towards getting the sector into a really good place, which is encouraging. I'd also say you've got to pressure the centre, how politics works. People don't like to say it, but number 10, number 11 holds a lot of power, and everybody else is secondary. So you can have a really fantastic Secretary of State, but all of the power is on that street behind those two black doors. And so you have to get to a point where Prime Minister, Chancellor in particular, gets the value of what youth provision means to this country. If I'm being completely honest, I'm not completely convinced that he quite gets it just yet. Maybe if you guys create an app, he'd be more interested because he likes apps and tech. Am I allowed to say that? Yeah. I'd also say the private sector. I mean, I know these are all charities, but you've managed to galvanize 18, 20 institutions to make sure you have a really powerful presence here in the middle of party conference. I would reckon it'd be quite powerful is if in every district and every county you're able to galvanize all the private businesses, and if they each gave something that might feel insignificant to them, before you know it, you've got a significant amount of match funding to help to increase the work that is being done locally. And controversially, I'd also say volunteers is a really important thing. I mean, we have fantastic people who are willing to give their time, and organisations who might not be part of the official statutory provision for young people. But we know that at the beginning of the pandemic, millions of people literally said, "Look, how can I help?" And if we can get to a point where we can have people also contributing, not replacing the youth workers who are the expert that you need, but contributing, I think we could possibly get to a good place. And last thing I would just say is we're really passionate about family hubs. I think there was a big challenge around the inconsistency in how they are involved in local areas, and we need to make sure we do what we can to make sure that provision is available across the country.
Thank you. Sam, can I ask you a question? You've been in the number 10 machinery. You've seen how it works. You've met with lots of us along the way. What's the one thing you think the youth sector or society needs to do to put young people, in the heart of the thinking of Treasury, to get that decision to put further investment in? What's the one bit of advice you'd give us?
That is a tough question.
Do you want to think about it and come back to it?
Yeah.
Teresa's got her hand up. Go, Teresa.
Yeah. So to my mind, if we want something out of the Treasury, we've got to give something back. And I think if we can actually prove, and we've done the math in Hertfordshire, that however much you put into working with families initially, you're going to save X, Y, Z in the future. So I think if we could do the same thing for youth services, but it's still about family, isn't it? It's all about that whole progression through. I would hope that might resonate with the Chancellor. I don't know. That's why I'm asking the question. Would it? Because we're nearly there with the evidence.
Yeah, I think compelling evidence, definitely important. Simplicity in politics is key. And the reality is, the Chancellor has competing priorities right now. And so the question will always be, so where is this money coming from? We don't want to borrow more. We're not going to tax more. So where's it coming from? One of the things I was working on before I left was the changing in dormant asset classes to allow charities to access more dormant assets. So I'm really fascinated by that. And one of the things I wasn't working on, that Sean Bailey was working on in his manifesto, was, of course, dormant oyster balances. So many people they come from all over the world on holiday here, they get themselves an oyster card, they leave £5 on it, and that card is in a dustbin somewhere. And now that's gone up to being worth about over 400 million quid. So finding pockets of money like that and making sure that the idea of it being invested in young people is in the front of people's minds is quite powerful thinking. So try and help the Treasury to do some of its thinking for itself.
Yeah, so the project that was touched on there is the National Youth Agency has led a national census of the entire youth sector across England, the largest mapping exercise in a decade of who's doing what, where, in which community, with what are the needs of those young people, the staffing of it, how it's funded, and we're now building. I mean, it must be millions of data points by this point we're collating. There's still work to do, but to be able to use that data to tell the narrative and the story, which is the bit that's been missing often. I hear the soft stories. I hear the young people coming and telling us what they want and what they need. But show me the money. Show me the statistics of why this is the truth. And then what's the benefit that's going to come from that? That's going to save me money down the track. And all that data will be an incredibly powerful tool. I would say Stoke is punching well above its weight at this in the youth zone. I mean, almost every event has had someone from Stoke talk. It's been amazing. So well done. Thank you very much. Yes. Do you want to come in with a question? Yeah. Can we just pass the microphone back? Thank you.
Hi there. I'm 26 now. I've been a member of the party for about 8 years. I live in Ardwick, which is just down the road, which is apparently classed as quite deprived. As a child, I went to an academy. I've been a member of the cadet forces. I was in the army. I've done NTS, and I know comparative experience. And I've been to youth clubs as well, but it was like on a Saturday youth club. I think I think we're probably barking up the wrong tree in terms of is where I see how young people from disadvantaged backgrounds come from there and how they've got quite well society is, I think it's education, coming from a private school, coming from a school which instills discipline, coming from a school that's quite strict on standards. The example I think was Boris Johnson. He didn't have a happy childhood, but he didn't let that stop him becoming Prime Minister. I have family members who went to private schools who didn't have a good childhood, who've got quite farther than me, even though I've had a happy childhood. So my question is, I don't think investing in kind of youth clubs is probably the answer. I mean, youth clubs, you know, playing FIFA or playing Orange Squash isn't was getting quite far really. So I think my question is, would it be better to invest or to put all our energy into good education, especially in the private areas, and give private education and bring that into state schools? Yeah.
So if I give you an interesting statistic, that young people spend 85% of their waking hours outside of school. So what do we do to keep them busy, to occupy them, to keep their brains moving, and prevent those that want to lead them down negative pathways being allowed to do that? So I think there's a challenge around schools can't do everything. Some young people don't want to go to school. School's the wrong environment. You know, we have an education system, you could argue, built around the Industrial Revolution that doesn't work for many young people. So there's a challenge around that. But I wonder, Simon, if you want to come in and give us your thoughts on, you know, the value of those youth services and why they're needed.
I think, like for me, for example, I did okay at school. I did okay. I kept my head down. I didn't really, you know, I wasn't known. I didn't do anything extra because at the end of the day, school was mandatory. Not everyone wanted to be there. Not everyone goes to the best schools, unfortunately. I know you had a private education. Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Fab. But I think that, as we've said, voting with your feet when it comes to youth work, when it comes to youth provisions, the young people have the option, and we can develop those programs. We can make them what the young people want and what the young people need, whereas the schools have so many different things they have to hit. They have so many targets, they have so many numbers they have to get, and very much is a tick box process sometimes, in my opinion, from being a young person. But I think that with youth provision, there's always room for development, there's always room for change. And that obviously comes with speaking to young people. That's exactly what MYA and YMCA have done, is they've got that opinion, and they've got those thought processes and what young people need. And I think that just having someone, like I said, that isn't a teacher, that isn't there, that you know is going to phone your parents and go, oh, Shana's just told me this, like she's not very happy, blah, blah, blah. You don't want that. You know when you're approaching a teacher or your head of year or your teaching assistant that they're going to say that and they're going to phone home because that is their processes. Whereas with a youth worker, obviously they cannot promise confidentiality. That's not what I'm saying. But it's someone in a formal setting. As a young person, if I stood and saw someone in a pair of jeans with a lanyard on, or a teacher in a suit and tie, I know for a fact that I would go to them. And I know with our young people, we have supported accommodation where I work, and they would much rather come and sit with me in, shall we say, in the garden, beside, on a bench, just sat chatting informally, just to express how they're feeling, their opinions, then knock on someone's door and go, hi, can I have a meeting with you? Can I have a chat with you? And I just think having that different environment is a completely different way to express your opinions.
Hang on. We'll take the gentleman back question here, and then I know Teresa wants to come in as well. Thank you. Sorry.
Hi, I'm Jason Knight, and I'm a medical doctor at the Royal Stoke. Another person from Stoke.
What is it with Stoke?
I'm one of them that didn't actually leave, actually went to Stoke. Right, so the point I wanted to make is that when I was in high school, we had this thing called a peer counselling initiative, and that's where, of course, we will speak to where young people in high school, whatever it is that we were dealing with, we will speak to someone who was a part of this peer group. And of course, they were all trained by the guidance counselors into the way in which they can speak to us and the various problems that we were experiencing. Now, I found that worked very well. I was one of those peer counselors, and I was wondering if you think that in this country that sort of initiative would work very well in your setting, because I know that a lot of young people, they suffer from anxieties and so forth, which is of course the #1 mental health problem worldwide. And I thought that something like that wouldn't require a lot of money, and of course it would work very well because as young people we speak to each other anyways about the problems. It's just about helping the peer counselors to learn those little techniques that they could use to help people to vent what's happening. And many times, many of the issues aren't necessarily serious issues that need to be escalated to the guidance counselor or even to the police or to the statutory authorities. And I was wondering whether or not you've ever thought about that, or whether or not it exists in any way or form already, and whether or not we could actually try to make it something that could be done in all schools, whether it is private school or even public school. Secondly, I wasn't quite sure, were you saying that we shouldn't have young people involved in the extracurricular initiatives?
Could you pass the microphone?
Oh, sorry. What I would say, just from your point, I think from what you've said now, youth clubs do work, but then not everybody who doesn't like school can go to youth club. Would it not, I think what I see now, I'm seeing divisions between youth clubs, schools, cadet forces, extracurricular activities. Is it possible if we all work together, so people who don't like schools do like a youth club, and teachers can actually integrate? Because I feel maybe that's why some methods work with some young people, and this is why my belief in kind of youth clubs isn't high, and I believe having a good education is the best one, but then maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'd say you're wrong and right. You know, it depends who you are. It depends on the individual and the difference that can make to them. And I also think we've got to smash our traditional thoughts of what a youth project is. You know, everyone thinks playing ping pong and playing pool and maybe a bit of an Xbox. And whilst some of those activities do take place, actually really high-skilled youth workers are running activities and engagement activities. What you described is what I would describe youth work as in some respects. I mean, almost so many crossovers with that. Maybe slightly less clinical in its approach, but actually the value, the benefit, the thing that's trying to be achieved is very, very similar. And that's what we're trying to achieve. And modern youth work is changing gear and going up a step from just open the doors and let them in, which is, and there was a load of that going on, and quite understandably, there's no money to fund that kind of stuff. But actually, professionally run, community-based supported youth services provides well-planned, like a teacher plans a lesson, a youth worker would plan a session with young people, would know the needs of those individuals that's coming in, would plan activities that kind of pick up on the challenges or whatever they're dealing or addressing, and they might run over 6-8 weeks, you know, programs and things like that. So yeah, you're describing very similar what I describe as modern youth work. Teresa, do you want to come in and respond? I think we're going to wrap this up in a minute, so I'll just ask all our panellists if they've got any final thoughts, and then I'll just give us a few thoughts.
Okay, I'm just going to come back on the gentleman's comments about youth centres. As we went on to say, I think it's about providing as much as you can, different things, sports, culture. You've got scouts, guides, you know, whatever. They're all out there, but it's about making sure that the young people know about it, and that's where you bring in the school in. They've got to. Schools need to be able to support young people to know where they can go, and it's somewhere safe for them to go, and that's where councils can come as well on the youth work. Peer counselling, it's in Hertfordshire. I'll have to go back there again. We do have that, and we have in many schools we have pastoral care networks. There's peer support and mental health, first aid. There's all that going on, but that's not everywhere. And that's the thing, and that's why not all schools will participate. And there it's down to the head teacher, invariably, or the deputy head who tends to do the peer support. So I think that's one place that there's a little bit more focus, although the government has provided quite a large sum of money for school mental health support, which is building up gradually. But again, that's being run by the NHS, which... in Hertfordshire, again, we work well with the NHS, so we are working in partnership, but that's not going to happen everywhere. So it's about making sure that either you work in partnership where the money is, because there's the money there, or that the government sort of thinks about actually believing in local authorities and having the faith in local authorities to deliver with partners all these services. So that's what I'd say.
No, fantastic. Thank you very much. David, would you like to give us your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think to kind of wrap all the kind of points together, what fundamentally we need is a youth strategy. Something that overarching looks at the school system, youth clubs, what's happening at home, all that in a whole holistic picture of what young people are doing and what they're going through and what they need. And that's the best way that we can look at it from that point of view to support young people. That can then bring together the different services that exist. So in response to someone's question, I can't remember who it was, but around what can councils do? There's leisure centres all over the place. Can you actually maybe make it cheaper for young people or free during certain times when it's not busy? If you have the power to do that locally, if you're bringing that in-house, then actually that's not creating new things or anything like that. That's using an asset you've already got. And again, thinking about businesses, what is the role of businesses in a youth strategy? We've said a few times, vote with your feet. You vote with your feet every time you pay for something in your local area. Why aren't young people turning around to businesses saying, I give you loads of my money, why don't you fund something locally in this area? And actually, if we can bring that all together in an overarching youth strategy, we can make sure that we actually try and tackle the key issues we want to through youth services.
Fantastic. Thank you. Samuel, your thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, really interesting discussion. The idea of peer support, I think, is so powerful. I think it happens a lot informally, but actually it's probably something that we should focus on more. I even just get memories of my own upbringing and the times when actually very powerful interventions happened. It was because of my peers. Relatively informal, but I think very powerful. We've got to keep making the case to government, central government in particular. Leveling up to me means better sharing of best practice, better resource, and a clearer commitment from the centre. I think we just got to keep fighting for it. It's very easy for people to think of youth provision as an afterthought. In fact, sometimes it's very convenient, to be honest. And I completely agree that actually hard outcomes are also important. So people having really good education must be the foundation, because that opens you up to the rest of the world and the rest of your adulthood as well. So, but I'm hopeful, but I know that there's still hard work to be done.
No, fantastic. Your final thoughts?
I just wanted to touch upon as well that we've mentioned education a lot, but then my question is, what happens when a 16-year-old leaves school, doesn't go to college, doesn't go to sixth form, maybe gets an apprenticeship, or doesn't, because you can work around that? What is there for them then? You know, young people now do go up to 25, SEND especially. So what is there available for those young people? And also just that youth provision, like I said, isn't just a youth club. I mention it quite a bit because it's very close to my heart. You know, I'm quite passionate about those. But I think, yeah, just to wrap up for me, that youth work has really changed my life. It really has, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And I want the next generation of, you know, you guys, in 10 years' time, it's going to be a whole new crowd here. And we want those young people to be supported to get to that point. So, I mean, yeah.
No, thank you very much. A few things for me. I mean, the new Children's Commissioner recently polled 500,000 young people's thoughts on what they wanted, what the issues they're concerned about. And the top three things, the third one slightly surprised us. The first one is education catch-up. You know, exams, pressure, you know, it's hit young people's education, and lots of talk about that. Second one was mental health. That didn't particularly surprise us. You know, it's a huge issue for young people. The third point that came out in the top three was youth work, a regular place to go once a week to access trusted adults and support. It's youth services. And nearly a quarter of young people voted in that poll, third. And I know that's been fed into number 10, and I know that's going in through the Department for Education. I got rumour that the DfE is working on a youth strategy. I mean, I need to go and pick up the phone and find out a bit more about that. If there's some themes that's been coming out of all the events across this youth zone over today, there's a number of bits for me, really, which is I'm fairly convinced there's probably enough money in the system. It's how you join the pots together and then spend it wisely. You know, there is money in Department for Health, there is money in education, there's money in DCMS. Getting departments to pull that budget and reallocate it slightly differently, adjust priorities, is ridiculously difficult, because those departments have fought really hard to get that pot of cash, and they're not going to give it up in a hurry. But actually, if you could break those silos, if you could pool the resources, there's probably enough to make a difference. What young people told us, they want reliable youth services. They need it week in, week out. They need to benefit when their life falls apart on a Tuesday afternoon, some week in November. They need to know they can go down to the local youth centre, find their youth worker, and they'll be there. And not a project that was there for 6-8 weeks like the food program over the summer. Brilliant program, but it ran for 6 weeks, then stops. Trusted adults, that one person, and the thing that, as a professional youth worker, the thing that always struck me talking to young people was when they would say, "You're the only person that believes in me. You're the only person I could come and have this conversation with. I can't do that with my parents. Can't do that with my peers. Don't like my teachers. Nothing against teachers. The teachers are amazing, but for some young people, that's a huge issue. You're on my level. You're invested in me, and I can trust you. And we have to use that power very wisely and carefully to support the most vulnerable young people. So equality of access, is a postcode lottery around the country of provision. There are local authorities putting more money. If you're in Sheffield, they've doubled their budget, £2 to £4 million going into youth services. It can be done. It's difficult. It was really difficult, but it can be done. And then the last thing I'd leave you with is the preventative benefit of early help. Providing the support for young people that stops them escalating into children's services, stops them escalating into more severe acute CAMS services, clinical services, saves us a fortune as a nation. And it's just good maths to fund frontline youth services. We've just not been very good at making the business case. So I hope you'll all work with us to do that. And thank you so much for coming and joining us. Thank you to the YMCA for supporting this event with us and doing it jointly. We've done it at both parties. It's been fun. And have a great evening. Thank you very much. And thanks to our panel. Thank you.